Welcome to the June 2nd, 2021 edition of the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series, brought to you by the National Urban League. I'm your host, Kenneth L. Johnson, president of the Harlem, New York-based diversity recruitment firm East Coast Executives and organizer of TEDx Harlem. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Let me introduce you to the platform. The Digital Career Success Series, DCSS, is a professional development series that helps members of our Urban League Young Professionals chapters and other diverse job seekers develop new skill sets that will enhance their careers. Through digital platforms such as webinars and Facebook Live, the goal is to provide an opportunity for professional development right from one's computer. Today's topic is the art of authenticity, featuring Mr. Damalo Ocean and sponsored by Anheuser-Busch. Mr. Ocean, happy to have you with us today.
Hey, Ken, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Man, listen, I was so excited to learn about you coming on the platform. Of course, we connected, we spoke, I took a look at your background. I can think of no one better to give a presentation on the art of authenticity. Your career speaks volumes about that. Tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit about your background and yourself.
Well, you're too kind. If you go to the next slide, I'll just kind of give you guys a little bit of my background. Like Ken said, my name is Damalo Ocean. I was actually born in Nigeria, but my family grew up in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Educationally, I'm an electrical engineer by education from my undergrad, and I have 2 masters from Washington University here in St. Louis, an MBA and a master's in engineering management. I've been with only one company in my career, and that's Anheuser-Busch, and I've been here for about 18 years. As the picture suggests, I love Budweiser, it's my favorite beer. If you look at my work experience, I've kind of come around full circle a bit. I started my career here in the St. Louis area. I spent about 8 years, but then life and the career took me to many different places. So we moved, my family and I, to Fort Collins in Colorado. We spent some time in Houston, Texas. I spent some time in the Great White North in Canada as the VP of supply up for the business called Labatt up in Canada. And about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, I got the opportunity to come back to St. Louis in my current role, which is the Senior Director of Zone Brewery Support for North America. So that's a bit about myself, Ken. Thanks for the introduction.
Man, you've been moving around, and I'm sure networking and kind of giving your influence as you kind of move throughout the ranks there at Anheuser-Busch. Congratulations and kudos on all the career success. I'm going to sit back for a minute. Listen, the Digital Career Success Series, we have the greatest audience in the internet world. People have a ton of questions that'll come through. I'll monitor the Q&A. I'll take a look at the chat, and I'm just going to let you take a deep dive into your presentation.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Ken. If you go to the next slide, I spent some time thinking about this topic, and Ken says, he thinks I have a background to be able to have this discussion. But to be honest, I wasn't sure I was really qualified to have this conversation when I was asked to do it. So I decided to go ahead and do some research, and I came across this book. The book is actually titled "The Art of Authenticity." It's written by Carissa Thacker. And I decided to read the book. And the reason I decided to read the book was to really give myself a little bit of context. And I'll actually encourage you all to read the book. It really kind of forms the basis of how I've structured this talk. And I think it really fit very well. But while I was reading the book, I actually recognized that there's a lot of things that I've learned and I have dealt with in my career that were actually very relevant to the topic. And I hopefully I can add something to the audience and everybody that's on the talk. While I was doing a little bit of research, I came across this quote as well. So the quote and the book are actually separate. Warren Bennis is another thought leader in business, and he wrote, "If knowing yourself and being yourself were as easy to do as people talk about, there wouldn't be nearly so many people walking around in borrowed postures, spouting second-hand ideas, trying desperately to fit in rather than stand out." And there's two lessons in this quote for me. One, being authentic as a leader is hard, and a lot of people actually don't do it very well. And the other is it's important to actually be authentic, because I think it's extremely important to stand out based on the things that we have and make us unique as people. This was kind of the call it my framework and how I kind of came about preparing for this discussion, and it's going to form the basis for how we kind of move forward. So if you go to the next slide, I decided to think about this topic by trying to understand what the case is for authenticity. Right? Why is it important? And obviously, some people would think, there's the obvious, right? So of course, it's important to be real. But within the context of business, I think it's important to really kind of think about what's the case for this. And I really kind of landed on four main things. The first, I would call it the practical case, and that's social media, right? For some of us that were born in the 80s and even 90s, to be honest, social media is a phenomenon that has basically grown exponentially in the past 15 years. Why do I bring up social media? Well, social media is basically an open book for all of us. For most of us that basically have a lot of our lives on social media, there's a version of you on social media that basically is probably closer to your real self. And knowing that you have a blueprint of your life on social media, when people try to construct for themselves a persona that is different from who they are, it starts to be in conflict. And I think in some ways there's a lot that's been said about the ills of social media. I would actually consider this one of the benefits of social media because it makes it easier for us to be our authentic selves in real life, right? Because the reality is everybody already sees you in the context of what you have out in social media. So there's probably like a little bit of a window, a little bit of an in for us to really just kind of to be that person that we portray to others in social media, unless you're gonna try to reconstruct this person you constructed for yourself on your social media platform. It's so much easier just to be who you are. The second point that I kind of came up with was really in the context of my life, right? In my experience, I really do believe that teams ascribe more trust to leaders that they think are authentic versus people that they feel that are fake. And if you think about the conversations you have with people in your day-to-day life, you talk about, well, that person, I feel like that person has an agenda. I feel like that person is fake. And I think really what's coming through is trust. People tend to trust people that they feel are authentic, people that they feel are being more of who they are, people that say what they mean, people that, they come across as living their values. People trust them more. And I think that's extremely important case, especially when you lead a team, for people to feel like, look, what they see is what they get. You are who you are. The next point is more of a result of authenticity. I think there's two ways of being. Some people basically believe in being fixed in their mindset and basically not growing at all. And some people believe in growing, right? And I think in leadership, growing is really the most important recipe to driving better leaders in the future, right? So when we think about my leadership, I think about my leadership journey. The one thing that I would say has marked, a lot of me is I recognize that I am an imperfect person. I recognize there's a lot of things about my personality that probably has to adjust as I move forward. And really, always self-reflecting and growing is extremely important. And I think I'm gonna talk more about this growth mindset as we move forward in this presentation. But I think it embraces growth versus being fixed. So I think that's extremely important. And then, there's been a lot of studies that have been written about diversity. So I'm going to kind of bring in different topics, concepts here. And there's a lot of topics that has been written about how diverse teams basically are better at solving problems. Diverse teams win more. If you have a team that is more diverse and another team that's less diverse, solving a problem, the team that's more diverse tends to solve the problem more. And I would like to subscribe to the discussion that authenticity, though, is an extremely important recipe for diversity to work. Because if you think about diversity, what is it about diversity that makes teams better when they're more diverse? It's because they bring different perspectives, they bring different experiences, they bring different views of the world into the way they solve problems. And that diversity of thought is really what ends up in better solutions. If you think about a team that might be diverse in the way people look and the way where people are from, if all they do is come together and conform to one mold of what they should be, you almost lose the magic of diversity, right? So in some ways, authenticity, I think, is important for diversity to work. Which is why I think that's an important point.
I'd like to chime in here real quick and ask a question of you. So as you speak about diversity and authenticity and leadership, right? How important is it for someone to really have exceptional listening skills? Because if it's a diverse group, you might not be familiar with all the things that encompass that interaction, right? So how important is it for someone to really focus in and kind of just understand the importance of listening?
Yeah, I really do think listening is one of the most underrated traits of leadership. I think when leaders want to bring out the best in their teams, leadership is listening is an important tool you have to have in your arsenal. I would say leadership listening is one of the things that people don't do very well. But I do think it is super important because only when we listen that we can actually understand the differences that our teams bring to the table is when we listen that we encourage people to bring their best selves, their authentic selves to the table. And I think that's an important recipe as a leader to ensure that people feel comfortable coming to the table with all of them. And I think listening is a critical, I would say, ingredient to making sure that comes to life. So I think you touch on an important point, Ken, and I think all of that together, comes together to really bring out the best in teams. And I think authenticity is at the heart of that, because when people are able to bring their authentic selves to work, listening by the leader allows that to happen, and then the magic of the diversity comes to life. So I think it's all connected, and it's all important part of this discussion. So if you go to the next slide. The next thing I really kind of spent some time pondering is I call it the myth busting. Some people have some notions of what authenticity is, and some people have some notions of what they think authenticity is in others. So there's really three big things that I really want the audience to be cautious about when you are approaching your personal authenticity journey, but also looking to others for examples of what authenticity is. So first is keeping it real. I mean, for most of us, I think we all understand the context of that statement. If you understand the context of that statement, I would say I think that the problem with the statement is it embraces this static mindset that people don't evolve, people don't grow. And I don't think that's right. I don't think that authenticity is the same thing as being static in the way you behave and the way you show up. I think it's a little bit more than that, and I'm going to get to here in a few more slides. But I don't think authenticity is really about just keeping it real, because I think it's so much more than that. The next point is how people see others. Some people look to leaders and see charismatic leaders, and they basically automatically assume that charisma equals authenticity. I would suggest that it doesn't. It actually has nothing to do with one, has nothing to do with the other. There are charismatic people that are just as fake as other people that are non-charismatic, to be honest. I think I would almost subscribe that charisma, people that have a lot of charisma, actually are probably better at being able to create a face for themselves that is not their own. So I would just be careful about when you're looking to somebody as an example of authenticity, just looking at charisma as the call it the character trait that leads you to a person that you want to emulate. And the last one is really this idea of being nice. Some people think nice people are generally speaking more authentic. At the end of the day, I think being nice is a great character trait. But I will be careful about ascribing authenticity just because a person is nice. I don't think that's necessarily the same. I think there's a lot of people that have been very authentic leaders that are not the nicest people. So I think that's an important characteristic that you want to make sure that you are paying attention to. So when I think about these three character traits, it's important that we you understand what authenticity is not, to make sure that you can recognize it when you see it. So if you go to the next slide, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, let's come in again, because I think this question is very valuable at this moment, right? So Tyler wants to know, what strategies should you employ when working in a predominantly white space as a person of color, when being your authentic self isn't always safe?
Yeah, I think I mean, if I think about the story of my life, I've worked most of my career in, I'll say, predominantly white teams. So all my, in circles. I think a lot of things I'm going to talk about in this talk are really going to get into a lot of the things that I have done personally as a professional. Um, I, I think the most important thing is to really understand who you are, understand the things that you care about, and ensure that you are holding on to that in all the things that you do to evolve yourself. Because the reality is, you have to evolve yourself as a person to make sure the way you're coming to life, you're showing up is relevant to the people you lead. But there's a lot of things that make us special. There's a lot of things that are important about how we see the world. There's a lot of things that they're in our experiences that I think are extremely important. Important to making sure that the team is complete. So as call it a black man that has been in an industry that is predominantly white, I spend a lot of time talking to my team about me, about the things that I care about the things that make me who I am, even educating my team in many ways about why I believe what I believe. And not in the terms of because I'm a black man or you're a white person. No, that's not really the point. It's just this is who I am. And of course, that is informed by the fact that I am a black man. And I try to help people understand this is why I am who I am. This is why I believe what I believe. And I think that resonates very well. It's resonated for me in my career because it helps people kind of see me. And then by extension, they start to understand why other people like me basically believe what they do believe. And that's why I think representation is extremely important, because I'm able to have those conversations because I'm in the space that I'm in. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Yeah, sure. I think you answered it extremely well. I have a follow-up to that question though. So these conversations and this sharing that you're doing, does it always have to be in a formal setting, or is it in informal settings? How are you working through that as a professional?
Super important comment. Most of the conversations that I have with members of the people that I work with are not in formal settings. Even if a discussion in a formal setting I think is going to go into an unproductive place, I take it to an informal setting usually. And part of that I can do because of the relationships, right? Because I form relationships with people regardless of where they come from in life. But most of the discussions that I've had that I think are the most important and the most penetrating have been in informal settings. Because I really think there's a lot of disarmament that happens in the informal settings. People are able to hear you better. There's a lot of dynamics about a formal settings that are not really conducive to discussions like this, right? Because there's people that are basically trying to leverage themselves. People are worried about how they look. There's other people that are maybe higher than us in the conversation. So people are basically worried about how the discussion basically makes them look. So it's just you're dealing with a lot of forces that are not necessarily conducive to a conversation like that. But I think it's super important to have the conversation. And I think always bringing that conversation to a head, I think, is something that is important. We can't avoid the conversation. You can't put it to the side. But you have to also be cognizant of the environment that you're in to ensure that people start to understand you, and by extension, they understand other people that are like you. And I think I make it more about understanding me, not necessarily understanding the black man that's sitting in front of you, just understanding me, understanding why I say what I'm saying. And I think that really kind of now connects that, because people know me. They've known me for 18 years. And so it's less about anything else. It's about, this is why I believe what I believe, and they can recognize the same thing when they see it in other people.
Excellent. Yeah, it seems like that's a conversation that happens on both ends, right? And an understanding from both sides of the conversation. People understanding you, but you also understanding and being not necessarily sensitive, but being aware of who they are as a person as well, and then building your relationship moving forward from that point.
Yeah, and I think what you've touched on is an extremely important point. I don't want to divert too far from the topic, but I do think the reciprocity of understanding other people's perspectives is super important. And I think as I go through this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the, I'll say, core tenets that I've actually employed for myself as a leader. But it contemplates this place where we have to also see where others people are coming from. Even if I don't agree with where they're coming from, I have to understand where you're coming from to be able to interact with people in a productive way. And I think when I approach people in an authentic way, the way that basically people feel like you're talking to Damola, the person, and everything about what I talk to you about is what I believe is how I see the world, and I'm trying to understand how you see the world. I think we get a lot more progress that way, and I have learned that I figure out a way to kind of bridge the gap most of the time. Not all the time. That's probably an unrealistic expectation, but most of the time, and a lot more progress gets made. So if I go to the next slide here. I always try to come back to I work for Anheuser-Busch. We have a set of principles that we live by. This basically underscores who we are. And when I think about our principles, there are 10 of them. There's 3 of them that I think really kind of speak to this topic of authenticity. And as a company, we try to really bring different people from different backgrounds. We're a global company, so we really have to make sure that we can have different kinds of people work together to really be able to achieve the things that we want to achieve. The principle number 2 and principle number 3 are really about our people, right? And it really talks about, if you look at the bolded parts of this principles, great people deliver and transform. I think the idea of transforming means that we're doing something different from what we've done before. Right? So you can't expect people to transform the business if everybody thinks about the business the same way. If everybody thinks about our problems the same way, they can't transform anything, right? So as a company, we embrace this idea that different people with different backgrounds come to see a problem and look at it differently to come up with a better solution, right? A solution we've never thought about before. And if you look at number 3, it talks about recruiting, developing, and retaining people who can be better than ourselves. We are measured by the quality and diversity of our teams. That's extremely important because I talked about before, diversity can't work without authenticity. And I think it's extremely important that we have authenticity that really drives diversity, that makes the teams win more and solve more problems. And then finally, principle number 5, we are never completely satisfied with our results. We embrace change, we take smart risks, and we learn from our mistakes. I think that's also extremely important because change only comes from different ways of thinking. Taking risks comes from listening to people that have different ways of thinking, and then being okay that sometimes you might make a misstep, and then coming back, understanding that mistake, and then coming back and doing something different. All of that really kind of embraces this idea that we expect our people to be bold, to take risks, to think about the world, think about our problems a lot differently than each other, come up with the best solutions, and then move forward together. That's kind of the whole premise of these 3 principles. So if you go to the next slide, I kind of then circle back to what I would consider the truth about authenticity. And I think this is kind of the meat of the conversation. Because in many respects, a lot of people think authenticity is about being static. And when I think about my life and I think about people that I've seen in my life that I admire, that I would ascribe authenticity to, right? That have been authentic leaders. I see this self-invention as part of their life. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that authenticity is self-invention. I'm suggesting that it requires self-invention because leadership requires self-invention. I got some advice when I was much younger as a professional, that the most important thing that I can do as a leader is to be self-aware, to always study myself, know yourself better than anybody else knows you. And it really was in the context of making sure that as I grew as a leader, I understood the things about myself that were good, the things about my beliefs that were core to who I was, but also how I interacted with people. How do I get the most out of people that I lead? All of those things, it all comes out of a place of self-reflection, self-understanding, which leads to self-regulation. I think it's a cycle that I think the best leaders in the world have mastered. But the reason I think authenticity requires self-invention is because self-invention is important to leadership. But in the process of self-invention, what you can't lose, the first bullet there talks about truth seeking. And what I mean by truth seeking is the most important thing I think is that people need to understand is what is core to you. What makes you special? What makes you tick? What makes you passionate? What is it about you that makes you uniquely you? Because in the growth projection as a leader, that core is the one thing that can never change. It's the one thing that you have to keep at the center of everything that happens next. Because I think as a leader, self-evaluation, frequent adjustments is a natural part of learning to be a better leader, learning to be a better communicator, learning to be a better, motivator. But there's a core to everybody that I think has to be maintained. And until you understand that, it's going to be hard to recognize when you've lost it. I guess that's the biggest piece of this is you have to make sure that your core stays uniquely you. And when I look at if I look at the next slide, I started thinking about some of the leaders in the world that we all mostly agree are authentic. I could probably fill this page up with, a lot of people, but I decided to pick three that I would say I respect a lot for their authenticity. Different reasons, I would say their authenticity comes across differently. But what you would notice that, man, the reality is the way they behave, the way they talk, the way they dress has probably evolved significantly over the course of their life. But we still look at these people as some of the most authentic people in the way they come across as leaders. And that's because, in my mind, that they understand, they understood what was core to their beliefs. And in their self-invention, they invented around that. People could still see, the 10, 20-year version of themselves in the past in their future selves. And I think about my life, right? I can say today, I'm almost 40 years old. And I can't say if you looked at me, I can't say I dressed the same way I dressed when I was 18. I can't say that, some of the things that would get me upset are the same things that I was when I was 18. I've grown. I don't use the same language that I used when I was 18. I have kids now, so they kind of, make you kind of evolve in life. That's a natural progression of life. That's a natural progression of growth. But what I would tell you is when I run into people that I've not talked to for 15, 20 years, one thing that's always the same that I would say I see is people always say, man, you haven't changed much. Reality is that's not true. I've changed a lot. There's a lot of things about my physical person that has changed. But I think what they're talking about is there's a lot of things that are innate to who I am, the things that I believe, the things that I do. There's a lot of things that are inside of me that probably didn't necessarily change, even though the packaging might have evolved. And I think that is the most important thing about authenticity, because people can sense when that is the case. When we start to lose who we are, when we start to lose our authentic self, when we start to lose, the core of who we are, I think is when people start to sense that, and then people start to say that you're being fake. And I think that's the most important that has to stay whole. So if you go to the next slide, I kind of put together what I would consider some steps that I would say that I use to make sure that I'm staying as authentic to myself as I can. So if you go to the next slide, the first step that I would say is always the same. You got to know yourself. You have to know yourself better than anybody else. You have to understand the most important things about you that makes you special, and you have to hold on to that very closely. Okay, very important. The second point that I have here is it says reject the choice to be you or succeed. I don't think that's necessarily a choice we have to make. I think knowing yourself and making sure that the core of yourself continues to show up as you grow as a person, I think is actually the best recipe for success. And some people will say it's easy for you to say this. You've grown quite a bit in your industry, in your career. But I would say I say that because I've grown pretty significantly in my industry and my career, and I just reject the notion that I'm going to be somebody that I'm not. A lot of people have told me over the course of the last 18 years, about who I should be, and I consistently basically tell them, well, I am who I am in certain ways. And here we are, 18 years later. I think I've done okay. And I think a part of why that is the case is because I've tried to stay as true to my core as I can. I think it's important to always treat yourself as a project. I think there's a lot of things about the behaviors that we have and the way we talk to people. Because at the end of the day, leadership is still about trying to get other people to do different things and actually trying to bring the best out of other people. And quite frankly, it doesn't really matter how smart you are. If you can't do that, then you're not an effective leader. And so I think the first step to actually being able to get people to bring their best selves and do more and be inspired is really first about knowing yourself and knowing how you interact with people, knowing how you show up with people. So I think it's important to always continue to treat yourself as a project. Embracing a growth mindset, I think, is important as well. Growing, I think, is extremely important part of this exercise, and I think part of that is really recognizing that we're not perfect. Most people, think that the best leaders were born that way. I don't think that's true. Maybe in a very small fraction of people. I think the best leaders grow. They make mistakes. They learn from their mistakes. They adjust, and then they, make more mistakes. Hopefully, you're not making the same mistakes over and over again, but you got to continue to grow. And then being transparent, I think there's a vulnerability that comes with people knowing that there is always a part of yourself that you continue to try to make better. I think is also important. People recognize that. They respond very well to that. And I think it really all comes together to connect in this authenticity journey, because I think the most authentic people are very transparent in just who they are. They're always communicating what they believe. They communicate what they see, communicate how they see the world, and people respond to that quite a bit. All of these, in my mind, are some of the steps that I would say that I take on a daily basis. And I'm not, let's be clear, I'm not perfect at it. I mean, I think there's every day I still keep trying to get better at just trying to be more authentic. Authentic version of myself, and it's obviously easier the higher you go in an organization. It is easier. I mean, I would not suggest it's not, but you have to start somewhere. And I think if we continue to kind of iterate in this way, I think more people will be able to be more authentic on a day-to-day basis. But I really do believe as businesses and as leaders, you become better leaders just because that really kind of starts to feed on itself. So that's kind of how I that's the prepared material that I have. Hopefully it was informative, and I think it's this point in time we can open up for questions.
Yeah, informative indeed. I was looking through some of the chat and some of the Q&A, and please keep the questions coming. We appreciate it. But I have a question here. So they want to know if there are trends around workplace authenticity and practice that you've seen across generations. Older or more conservative groups leaning towards respectability, politics versus newer generations leaning away from compartmentalizing or playing smaller across lines of difference. So do you see any characteristics that play out between generations? And I think this is really important because this is one of the times and one of the conversations that we speak about as younger workers come into the workforce and more senior workers continue to be a big player in our workforce. We have 4 generations in some workplaces, right? So with that being said, how does that play out in terms of authenticity?
I've spent some time thinking about the question, but I think it's a very important question because authenticity requires, somebody to allow that to flourish. And when you have multiple generations, I think there's natural barriers that are in the way because at the end of the day, if a leader does not allow authenticity to flourish in an organization, it's difficult to be authentic. Let's be clear. I think it's still important to be, but it's difficult. So as you have multiple generations, I would say, I can't say in our organization that is something that I see because I think our principles and the way we basically conduct ourselves encourages, people of all generational backgrounds to really try to understand, the perspectives of other people. But in isolation, I think it's hard to basically conclude that it's not there, right? Because you have to try to understand why a person believes what they believe, why they think what they believe. You have to accept that somebody is going to be different in their worldview than you are. So I can see at a high level how generational lines could make it harder to be authentic. Yes. And if I think about it in my day to day, do I see situations when that occurs? Absolutely. It doesn't stop me from continuing to try to break through, because I think it's up to both parties, right? The if we assume the leadership level is the person in the earlier generation and vice versa. I would say in our business, I would say in a lot of cases it could be reversed, right? I mean, the leader could be the person in the younger generation, and vice versa. So in some ways, I actually have to encourage people that are in a different generation, that maybe later than myself or earlier than myself, to actually bring their authentic selves as well. Right. So I don't think that relationship is necessarily one way, right? But the answer is, for me, it is more difficult because, again, it's about seeing the world from the person's viewpoint, but it's more about allowing that person to bring their viewpoint into a discussion so we can have better outcomes. And so I think different generations should coexist, because I think we still get better outcomes.
Sure.
The key is letting that flourish.
So another question, would you say that in order to be a successful leader, you have to be authentic? Is there a way to skate by on charisma and or knowledge without being authentic to your true self? And I guess that's a big piece of, the conversation for people, right? Can they, if they're not bringing their true self to work, can they still truly be successful? And I'm just wondering how you feel about that.
I mean, the only honest answer to that question is yes. I mean, the reality is there's so many people in leadership positions that I would say are not authentic at all. I mean, I can say that truthfully. But I do believe I believe that there would be a limit, to be honest. At some point in time, it starts to break down on you, because it's so much easier to be who you are than to try to be somebody else. I would suggest, that's why I brought social media as the first discussion, that at some point in time that starts to collide. You start to get a little bit of collision between how you show up and how you show up at work and how you show up in other places. So when that starts to break down, when people start to see the facade for what it is, I think that will impact the trajectory of a person. But the only honest answer to the question has to be yes, because there are so many people that I would say are not authentic in leadership positions. Eventually, though, I just have to believe that will collide, and then it's so much easier just to be who you are, to be honest, and then really construct who you become around who you are. And I think that just becomes so much more effortless, and then more lasting, if you may.
Yeah, the pressure of carrying on that facade could be overwhelming at least, right? So I have another question here. Are there any strategies around how to be more transparent and getting people to know the real you at work outside of social media, especially if you're an immigrant from a different culture and you don't necessarily speak the way your colleagues do?
That's an important question. I mean, obviously, I'm an immigrant to the U.S., and I've been with how you speak is who you are. It's innate to who you are. But when I answer the question, I think reaching out, having informal discussions is the only way, right? I think mentors, are important in this regard. I think for me, when I was a young man with Anheuser-Busch, I had mentors. I had people that I gravitated to for many reasons. And some people were just because they thought I was able to get things done. And I leveraged that for other things to really kind of help me kind of maneuver through, this big company that I didn't know anything about, right? So I think mentorship is important. I do think representation is important, which I think is getting better, right? I mean, so mentors that are like you, mentors that have similar backgrounds as you do, searching them out is also probably a good idea, because they've lived through some of the things that you might be living through as a younger professional, and it can help, right? So the best strategies for me is really trying to get people to help maneuver, and most people revel at the opportunity to help others, right? I mean, most people are actually, are driven or gravitate towards trying to help other people if other people reach out. Well, it's up to you to seek them out, right? Seek them out and then really kind of talk about these things in a very real way. I think some people are afraid to talk about some of the things you just described, right? That I'm afraid about bringing my full self to the workplace, that I talk differently. So I feel like people judge me for that. People are afraid to actually have that conversation. And to be honest, I would encourage people not to be, right? Because I think it's such an important topic in the public discourse, but also, in businesses today, that it will become a welcome discussion. And then I think it will unlock, different things, different strategies, different resources that can really help, kind of guide individuals. So I would just encourage just finding somebody you trust that you can kind of connect with, and then really having them expand your network that way to really kind of help maneuver you through those discussions. Because in the past, nobody wanted to talk about these kind of things. Everybody wanted to talk about performance. Everybody wanted to talk about, okay, yeah, am I doing well in ABC task? When the reality is, it's not just that. It's about, some of these other things that are so important to the business place today.
You brought up a really valid, there was a piece of that at the beginning that caught my attention. And you were speaking about mentors and kind of how, being your authentic self and with the support of mentors made it a little more seamless for you. But you also said that those mentors kind of took to you because you got things done. At the end of the day, being your authentic self at work is a lot about performance. And I'm just wondering if you can touch on that a little. How do you get that type of exposure? You're producing results in your area, and your manager is supportive of that work, right? But how do you get seen throughout the organization? You're a person that's been promoted through and have grown in your organization. How's that happen for you when your manager may not be the one waving the flag for your performance?
Yeah, and that's an important topic. So I think it's important to get into, especially with the audience that we have. If I think about my life, and I've been asked this question many times by people that have worked in my teams, is how have you treated your career? I don't, there was a time in my life that I never really actually thought about my career as something that I had to work on. I still don't in many ways. But there was a few pieces of advice that I got much earlier in my life, in my career. And the first piece was, look, at the end of the day, personality is not going to drive results. It's not going to drive success. It's not about personality. It's about results. It really all comes down to that. And I think everything else really supports that. It really comes across to basically support that in the whole package. And so for me, what I've always tried to do when I've gone from one role to the next, regardless of how small my responsibility was to take a step back. When I got into the role, I said, look, what do I want at the end of my time in this role to be remembered for? Why would people remember that I had this role? What is it about it that is going to make my time in this role memorable? And I actually write it down. And I say, even if I'm in the role, 2 years, 5 years, doesn't matter. I write it down. What do I want to transform? And then I keep checking. But I have a discussion with my leaders and help them understand this is what I want to achieve. Of course, when you set a specific goal for what you want to do in a responsibility you have, well, there's a higher probability you actually do it, because quite frankly, you've laid out a plan, and then you check against that plan and see how you're doing. If you're not doing so well, you adjust. But when you've made a goal that is big enough, when you dreamt a dream that is big enough, so that's a start. And then you start to check, how are you doing against that? There's a higher probability that you actually get there because you already know what it looks like. So I've always done that. Sometimes unconsciously, but I got to a point in my career that I actually started doing it consciously. And I actually got some advice that, you want to sit down, you want to think about it. What exactly do you want to wake up 3 years from now in this area that you're responsible for? What do you want it to look like? Because that's what people are going to remember that, Tomola was known for. When I left St. Louis Brewery, a lot of people today still know my name, not because they work with me, It's just because there's a lot of things that I set out with my team to change as a team. We wanted to do this together, and then we did, and those things last, right? And those are the things that basically are make people stand out, if you may, because if all you're doing is basically keeping the status quo, nothing is really changing. I mean, then it's really about conformity. That is the height of conformity. You're basically just trying to keep the lights on, if you may, and really what I try to figure out is, how do I bring what myself into this? How do I bring my, the perspective that I have that's a little bit different into this role that I have? I think about it in a very intentional way, and then I set out with my team together to make it happen. And I think in doing that, not only do I get recognized from my leadership on that, my team also gets recognized. My team grows at the same time, because as a leader, the single biggest thing that I think makes me, makes me happy, I would say that gives me satisfaction is even today is when my team grows. When I have a team that basically grows in their careers, they grow in their leadership. So I think it's really about myself, but also my team, right? And as you grow as a leader, that becomes even more important because it's more about other people being successful in the organization.
Damola, we're coming down the home stretch here, so we're going to go through some of these questions rapid fire style, right? So what do you recommend in terms of authenticity when confronting offensive behavior on the part of management officials?
Well, that's a hard question, and I don't know if there's one answer to that question. I think it's important not to, escalation is never a good idea. Confrontation is actually probably never a good idea either. In a heated place. I think understanding is always the best place, right? So I've always had this. I'm going to say it, and I would say in my life, I've actually struggled with this. So I'm going to say something that I've learned, and I try to basically live up to this ideal. But I can't say I've always lived up to this ideal. I think always the best way, based on my experience, to basically help people understand that there is disrespect in an interaction is to bring the temperature down, but have that conversation at a lower temperature. Because I think it's important for people to understand how interactions basically come across, how they affect you, et cetera, that you cannot let that cannot be left unaddressed. But the heated moment of a discussion, nobody wins, right? Because nobody actually hears anybody. To be honest, when I find that when I get to a certain place in my stress, in my fervor, I'm not listening anymore. It's done. Whatever comes next, man, it's really just about being louder than the next person. I know that about myself, so I have to assume the same about others, right? So what I've tried to do as much as humanly possible was to bring down the temperature, actually probably stop the discussion as much as I can, and then come back to the conversation, right? When everybody's kind of had an opportunity to kind of sit back, assuming this individual has your best interest at heart, probably came to the discussion and also in the same place that I could come to the discussion. I could lose control as well. And then really have a conversation about why that was a problem, right? And then talk about it. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to agree, but I think there's a higher probability of people seeing things your way from your perspective, and then together you agree on a way forward. Because there is no winning, to be honest, when there's this place where things become unresolved. It doesn't end. Right. And then you just kind of walk away in contempt. And you still have to work with the individual. So quite frankly, this is probably disruptive for both because, and more so to the person that's subordinate, to be honest. So I think it's in our best interest to really kind of bring it down, have a discussion when things have kind of cooled down, and then really make sure you explore why the discussion was problematic or the interaction was problematic, and then really explore how we can together move forward.
All right, great. What resources or actions can we take if there is senior management pushback on how we show up at work?
That's probably a question that is probably situational. Depends on what the industry is, what the company is. I would say for AB, we have many avenues, right? We have mentors because I think mentors are always a good idea, a good way, because a lot of times that's why I always think it's always good to have a mentor, right? A mentor is on the side, not in your leadership call it line, that you have these discussions with. And the good thing about mentors, they could be your advocate as well, so they can have a discussion with your leader, but they're not they're not in your leadership line. So I think mentors are always a good resource that I have used in my past. For a company like ours that takes this very seriously, it's important. We have formal paths, right? Because our company takes it so seriously. We've established a formal path to make sure that we can escalate. So in whatever industry that you're in, you have to check, is there a formal path to escalate things that have become untenable. I would only suggest that when you've taken the steps to really try to resolve yourself as well.
Yeah, no, and those steps could be documenting at the point, and then bringing that information to your 6-month review, to your annual review, and then kind of having an open conversation one-on-one prior to escalating through to other parts of the organization to get something resolved. You may be able to work that out, on a face-to-face basis with your manager.
Yeah, that's why I think that's why I said the first step is really to diffuse and have a conversation face-to-face. I personally don't like to have conversations come to a head in a 6-month review. I really don't. I think it's I think to be honest, I'd rather resolve problems, because I think the things that fester between whenever a situation occurred and a 6-month review things could snowball. So I agree. If you've taken the opportunity to have a discussion more in the moment, I think the next natural step is review, a formal appraisal period when you have a one-on-one with the manager. Yes, absolutely, Ken. I think that's a try to resolve with your manager first, and at the point in time where you can't, and you have to think about other things.
All right, next question for you from Alyssa. What kind of advice would you give to someone who may not know how to accomplish their goal?
Yeah, it's important. I think most people don't know how to accomplish a goal that you set. If you set a goal big enough, you probably don't know how to accomplish that goal. It's big enough. So I think you have to use your network, right? I would encourage having peers, other people that you see that have changed things that maybe you want to learn. You gotta be bold, right? You gotta reach out. You gotta go talk to other people that have done certain things that maybe are going to be helpful to you to be able to get where you need to get to. I would suggest also, formal education, right? A lot of things I always say I'm always learning. So, I read a lot of books. I used to read a lot of books. I don't have a lot of time to do that now, but I used to read a lot of books on people that have done that in their careers. But there's always a resource, somebody that has, and I would always look for, that person, look for that perspective, and then bring that into my personal, experience, and then try it. So I would encourage also a peer mentor, right? Somebody that you think, has the skills that you want to become better at, and then cultivate a relationship, and then talk to them about what you're trying to achieve, and then let them help you as well.
Yeah, I think, you spoke about this earlier, but, the art of goal setting, right? Setting the goal, seeing it, actually visualizing that particular thing, but then maybe breaking it down into small pieces, right?
Sure.
Maybe you break your goal down to small, attainable action steps that take you in that direction. And as you move in that direction, I think you'll find some allies around on the journey that may be able to support and or assist you in accomplishing that goal. Good luck with that. Have another question for you from Amber. Actually, you know what? Let's go here. As a leader, have you ever noticed or experienced a team member who was struggling to be authentic and trying hard to fit in instead of standing out? Can a team adapt to one person's differences, or should a person adapt to the team?
Yeah, by definition, a person shouldn't adapt to the team, to be honest. So that is the core of what we're talking about here. So let me answer the question in stages. Have I noticed people that have struggled to bring their authentic selves? Yeah, absolutely. Right, and there's many reasons for that. Some people are more quiet. They they don't talk much, so in the middle of a team dynamic, they can kind of get relegated to the side. Um, I think I have handled that wrong, and I've learned, and over time I've tried to do better, right? When I noticed that in my team dynamic, I try to, because sometimes actually, calling the person out in the middle of discussions is actually probably problematic too, just because of the way they, just their personality. So a lot of times I would try to have discussions with them separately, to really kind of say, hey, I might say, hey, what do you think, about this, or have a different discussion with them about, hey, how do you want to, how can your ideas come to life in this team dynamic? How can I put you in a situation where we can bring the things that you that are good for you to the fore? Sometimes it's actually an organizational design discussion, right? So in some cases, I've had people that might have been in the wrong role, right? And you look at that and say, man, because of the role that they're in, it's kind of hard for them to kind of bring their skills, things that make them very special to the fore. So you kind of, maybe we adjust the role and say, hey, maybe I can, if you're in this role, you can kind of shine more. So I think that's there's many different ways. But I think as a leader, though, it's super important to recognize when that is the case. Because if that is the case, then you're not getting the most of the team. You're not getting all the perspective that the team has to offer, and then trying to figure out what way to resolve that depends on the person and depends on the team. But I would say it can never be the outcome for the person to conform to the team. But it's not the same question as, look, a decision has been made and this is what we're going to go do. It's not the same discussion, because there's decisions that have to be made. A lot of organizations, you have to make decisions. But the bringing the person's full self into the process of making the decision, I think is something we have to continue to strive for. And I think as leaders, there's many tactics that you can take in a situation. All right, so I'm going to look in the Q&A, and I'll go to the first questions. So the first question is, would I characterize our company's 10 principles as rules of engagement? If not, how will I differentiate? I wouldn't say they're rules of engagement. I think they're principles by which our culture is built on, right? So these are the things that we share as a company, and the things we believe, and are the things that basically amplify, that in words personify the way we show up, we behave as an organization. So the things that we believe is really what our 10 principles are, and that's kind of how I would differentiate, because I don't think they're rules. Rules of engagement are basically, thou shalt do this. Think about 10 commandments. Those are rules of engagement. The principles are really, characters that we basically all share. If I go to the next question, trying to be open and transparent. What should you share, and too much info have bad day problems at home? Okay. Look, I think the spirit of this question is really about how to be transparent. I think at a high level, transparency is always a better way. I think there's this word I'm looking for, but it's really about being vulnerable. I think people respond very well to vulnerable leaders, and also recognizing that, look, we're not going to be good at this every single time, right? The reality is, I'm probably not going to be good at this most of the time. Is important, but I think being vulnerable and being transparent is always a good characteristic to have with your team, because then your team helps you to become more authentic. Because when you share with your team that this is a journey you're on, then they can actually join you on the authenticity journey. And I think that's always a useful sounding board to really have at your disposal. I see you're back, Ken.
Yes, I'm back.
Do we have time for one more question?
I think we are wrapping it up.
Okay.
So we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We will be back, in 2 weeks with Imposter Syndrome. We have a great lineup for this event, the secret fear of high achievers. For people of color, the feelings of fraud and imposter syndrome can work together to feel like a weighted blanket. During this webinar, attendees will learn new strategies and methods on how to conquer imposter syndrome while preserving their mental health. This is sponsored by Zendex. The date, June 17th. We'll do it again at 12 noon. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. I sincerely appreciate it. Damalu, I really want to thank you. You delivered an incredible presentation. I'd like to thank Kristen Bray, Wanda Jackson, and the entire team at the National Urban League. This is what we do, the Digital Career Success Series. Sir, please let our audience know how to stay in touch with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ken. I'm on LinkedIn, same name. So feel free to reach out if you want to connect, and we can take this wherever you want to take it. So appreciate the time, and looking forward to talking to you guys offline.
Looking forward to staying connected with you as well. Thank you so very much for today.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.